Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on Monday, February 13th for the board workshop. Today's workshop agenda includes a budget update. So Bill.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. We are here today for a budget workshop, and the district is faced with some budget challenges. However, I would like to say I'm confident that we can and will move towards a stronger, more sustainable budget over the next 2 years. To make this happen, we will increase efficiencies throughout our system, reduce our expenses, and realign our staffing levels to our enrollment. We plan to manage a phased approach to reductions over the next 2 years. And as we do this, I am also confident that we will continue to make progress on the strategic plan. We have a goal of ensuring our students are future ready, and students are at the heart of our work, and we will continue to provide outstanding educational opportunities for students and families in the Valley. I have about 35 to 40 minutes of material to share with you, and then I'll open up for questions. And if I can get through the material, I may answer several of your questions along the way. So here we go. And there we go. Okay, so we have been following an aggressive timeline for budget planning, and so far we have stayed on target. We are at step 5 of the process, and this budget workshop will involve the presentation of 3 budget scenarios for board consideration. 2 of those scenarios share similar savings outcomes and staffing impacts, but are based on different assumptions, and I'll explain some of that in more detail in a moment. As we move into a review of the scenarios, you are going to see a lot of numbers and tables that attempt to help you understand the dollars and cents aspect of this work. However, I know you are all also aware that behind the numbers in today's scenarios are people. In particular, our dedicated staff members, which I consider our greatest asset. Each of our current staff bring value into our system for students and families, which makes this work hard. We appreciate our staff, their dedication, and their work. Moving toward a sustainable staffing level that is aligned to our enrollment involves some difficult decisions, and those decisions have an impact on individuals and families. And it's for that reason that we've attempted to maintain a very aggressive timeline in getting information out and preparing to make decisions early, so that those who will be impacted both in and out of our system have the earliest opportunity to make decisions for themselves and for their families. As part of our annual budgeting process, we developed a set of guiding principles. These principles will be used from year to year and provide a framework to ensure that we allocate our dollars in line with the priorities set forth in the district's strategic plan. The guiding principles you see here were developed with input from our administrators, our union leadership, and the board budget committee. And you've seen them before. You'll see in some of our work today how we incorporated some of those principles. In addition to the guiding principles, we set forth several goals for budgeting, and these goals include the use of natural attrition, such as resignations or retirements, to assist the reduction process. I will say currently I am aware of at least 11 cert retirements and 13 classified retirements. How the openings created by those retirements play out in this process depends on several factors. For example, some retirements or resignations may come from positions that must be replaced, such as certain special education staff, for example. Others may come from positions that could possibly be absorbed. So when a vacancy occurs through either a retirement or resignation, we will evaluate the feasibility of not filling the position or potentially filling it from within using current staff if possible. These goals also outline the need for the aggressive timeline we have undertaken. I mentioned earlier, we do this in order to let staff know early about potential impacts. In addition, we work to maintain collaboration and trust with our union leadership throughout this process and will continue to do so. And last, but certainly not least, we have a goal to spread the impact of reductions across the system. In the three scenarios I will present today, I hope it is transparent and evident that we have attempted to spread the impact not only across employee groups and grade levels, but also across multiple years. As part of the process, we did provide staff with at least 2 opportunities to share feedback. And here's a quick reminder of some of the themes that emerged in the feedback. You will see in the scenarios presented today that we are attempting to address some of the suggestions from the survey, in particular, the perception that we are top heavy at the admin level. But in addition, we have updated our budget frequently asked questions document on the district website and published a series of budget update videos to address some of the more common questions that are out there. And the budget update videos and our frequently asked questions document and other resources are available, easily accessible on our website. So again, before we head into scenario, just a quick reminder for the public who may be joining us in this budget process for the first time. Our budget includes 5 separate self-balancing accounts, and each account is designed for carrying out specific purposes, and therefore each distinct fund has its own revenue sources, its own associated expenditures, and a separate balance. The 5 accounts are the general fund, the capital projects fund, the debt service fund, the transportation vehicle fund, and the associated student body fund, or ASB. And for those in the public who wish to learn more about the specific purposes for each of these funds, I would refer them again to the budget section on our website, where they can find an Understanding School Financing document and associated video. Our largest budget category is the general fund, which is what most people think of when you think of the district's budget. It comprises about 92% of our entire budget, and those dollars are used for financing the normal everyday operations of the district, such as salaries and benefits for our staff, supplies and materials, contracted services, and travel. The other funding areas are much smaller and target, again, specific purposes. So today we will be talking about general fund dollars in our scenarios. The school districts in this state are funded by a combination of dollars from state, federal, and local entities. Our largest source of revenue, about 69% of our revenue, comes from Washington State in 2 areas: general purpose funds, which we often refer to as apportionment, and state special purpose funds, which are often referred to as categorical funds. The state general purpose funds are for the operation of the basic education programs in the district. The state special purpose funds are used to provide additional support programs, such as special education, highly capable programs, bilingual program supports, and learning assistance programs. About another 21% of our revenues comes from federal sources, and these funds are very restricted and can only be used for specifically designated purposes. The federal dollars support our migrant and bilingual programs, our Title I program. They provide some additional special education supports, and also, importantly, they support our free and reduced lunch programs. Most of the remaining 10% of our revenues are from local sources such as levy taxes. And the local levy funds are the least restrictive of all our funding sources, but they are essential to funding additional supports and in providing a well-rounded education for our students. All of these revenue dollars from both the state and the federal government are driven by enrollment and student need. So here are some current enrollment numbers compared to our budget numbers. We are, as of this month, about 68 students over what we budgeted, but still down about 70 students from last year. So we are still in a declining enrollment situation this year. And it's important to note these numbers do not include Running Start and Open Doors students. We usually don't include those numbers because the college and the Open Doors programs get the majority of the dollars for the students they serve. The dollars follow the students. We have seen a decline in enrollment since about 2015-16. That was when the Alcoa plant closed, but several additional factors are likely contributing to this continued decline in enrollment, including a continued decline in birth rates for both the city of Wenatchee and Chelan County during the same time period, as well as the opening of Pinnacles Prep, a new charter school in our area. Every year that they add a grade level, we find 35 to 40 students make a different choice. And there was some impact as a result of the pandemic as well. Here is another look at our enrollment along with staffing levels over the same time period. And over the past 3 years, our staffing levels have increased. Some of that was intentional as part of the results of our expansion of career and technical education programs, as well as an effort to keep class sizes lower coming out of the pandemic. In addition, staff increases were made in efforts to provide increasing social, emotional, and behavior supports for our students. We are, however, now at a point where staffing levels are out of line with what can be supported by enrollment. I would like to call your attention to the pre-COVID staffing levels here, that 851 to 867 range. I think that range is important because you will see in the scenarios presented today a path to get back closer to pre-COVID staffing levels over the next few years. So in order to realign our revenues and expenses, we have targeted a preliminary reduction range between $8 and $9 million. And one could ask, why is this range so large? And the answer is related to several unknown parameters that will be important parts of our budgeting process. We do know that the federal ESSER dollars will be pretty much spent out by the end of this year. And we also know that based on prior trends, we are predicting a continued decline in enrollment. However, the impact of the current legislative session is largely unknown. The governor's budget contains a 4.5% inflationary price deflator, and Governor Inslee's budget proposal is just an opening parlance for lawmakers. We have no idea where that percentage will actually land. In addition, the legislature is discussing a potential increase in the base salary for all our staff, as well as debating the future of regionalization dollars, both of which will have budgetary impacts for the district. Unfortunately, because this year is a long session for lawmakers, they get to argue about this stuff until at least late April, which makes it difficult to build some of these unknown factors accurately into scenarios. For that reason, we are looking at what I will call target values in the scenarios we present today. We've built these values in knowing that some of these parameters will have future impacts, but in order to get information out into the system as early as possible, we moved forward. Therefore, we recognize that the scenarios presented today represent our best plans based on what we know at this time and are presented as savings targets that may need adjustments as we learn more. Inching toward the scenarios, I know you're aching to get there. The scenarios represent our best approach to savings targets with our current understanding of parameters. And each scenario presents a phased approach that attempts to spread the reductions over a 2-year period. In addition, each scenario provides targeted reduction amounts that get us into the preliminary over $8 million reduction range that we think we need to be in. This table shows non-staff related reductions that we're looking at, and it is the same in each of the 3 scenarios. So let's take a look here. All the scenarios you will see today have the same reduction amounts for non-staff related costs. because we have put in there what we think we can do as a maximum amount in each of the scenarios. These include reductions in materials, supplies, and operating costs, contracted services, and time sheeting. The MSOC values here include reductions in travel and capital outlay, as well as the material, supplies, and operating costs. You will note that the contracted services reductions are larger in the 23-24 school year. And that as a result of us planning to end some larger contracts that are currently funded with ESSER dollars. As the ESSER dollars move out of the system, we will be ending some of those larger contracts that have been funded with ESSER dollars, which means it will become more difficult to reduce contracted services in the 24-25 school year, but we've targeted about 110,000 in contracted reductions in year 2 of all of these scenarios. These non-staff related reductions amount to a little over $1 million in savings over the 2-year time frame. And again, those reductions are a part of all of the scenarios you will see today. Another issue that you will see as a factor in all 3 scenarios today is the future of the Wenatchee Internet Academy. Wenatchee Internet Academy, or WIA, was opened in the 2021 school year in response to the pandemic and was funded almost exclusively with ESSER dollars in the 2021 and 21-22 school years. One benefit of the pandemic experience is that we learned as a system how to engage students in different ways through online learning. By continuing WIA beyond the pandemic, we have been able to meet a need that we were not otherwise meeting for some students and families. However, since its opening in 2021, we have seen a continued decline in enrollment in WIA. So I will be sharing some numbers with you regarding enrollment at WIA and costs associated with running the program, as that info plays into some of the scenarios we are about to consider. In doing that, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's important to keep in mind when we look at numbers and tables, people will be impacted. There are families who have benefited greatly from the WIA opportunity, and we have heard from some of them recently. And I want to thank the families that have reached out to express to the board how WIA has benefited their students. The 3 scenarios I will be presenting today each incorporate a different path for the future of WIA. So let's dig into those scenarios. I guess before we do, I want to set a little bit more information about WIA in front of the board. So I mentioned WIA was created as a response to the pandemic in 2021. And over that school year, the annual average FTE was about 433.1, but enrollment peaked in February of 2021 at about 533.7 students, which is approximately the size of some of our middle schools. For the first 2 years we operated WIA, the funding was almost exclusively provided via ESSER dollars. As ESSER dollars are now leaving the system, we are increasingly using BEA and categorical dollars to fund WIA. Since its opening, we have seen a decrease in enrollment. This slide also shows current enrollment and teaching staff at WIA by grade level bands. We currently have 57 students at WIA, and of those 57, 4 students do come to us from outside our district boundaries. 1 from Cashmere, 1 from Eastmont, 1 from Entiat, and 1 from Puyallup. Those 57 students are served by 5 very talented teachers who run creative programming for those students. In addition to the teaching staff, WIA has an instructional coach, some administrative support, secretarial support, and some special education supports as well. This slide shows current budget information for WIA. We are overstaffed at WIA for the number of students enrolled. That is resulting in an expected deficit of about 330,000 by the year's end, which means WIA is about 3 certificated positions overstaffed. That number plays into some of our scenarios today. So with all of that background, it is finally time to start looking at scenarios, and you have information on paper that will show together the scenarios. I can only fit one at a time on the slides here. So I begin by sharing dollar amounts, and these are savings targets. In this first scenario, as with all our scenarios this afternoon, we reduce about $1 million in non-staffing costs over the next 2 years, and the remaining reductions are spread throughout staff and over the 2-year period across employee groups and across grade levels. Scenario 1 gets us to over the $8 million amount and results in reductions of approximately 75 to 77 current positions that would not be backfilled over the 2-year period. I will share more information about those 75 to 77 positions in a moment. Please note that I have shown the impact in red of the board's willingness to commit the $2.8 million from our reserves to assist with reductions. That amount keeps us from doing all these reductions in the 23-24 school year, but it must then come out as part of the reductions made in the 24-25 school year. This scenario and the 2 that follow were built on several assumptions. For staffing, in all the scenarios, I have used median salary values for each of our 3 employee groups: administrative staff, certificated staff, and classified staff. In addition, this particular scenario was created under the assumption that we discontinued WIA, and importantly, that in doing so, the majority of our current WIA students would re-enter our brick and mortar schools. The 8th grade class at WIA, which is about 12 or 13 students, will be moving into the high school, which leaves about 33 to 45 students that we hope will re-enter the system. This scenario assumes 33 to 45 would re-enter our brick and mortar system. That is an important assumption that has implications. If, for example, instead, less students, maybe less than half of the current students, return to one of our brick and mortar schools, the impact would require additional reductions in staffing during the next few years to this model by about 2 additional teachers or CERT staff. Scenario 2 is nearly identical in targeted savings as scenario 1, yet there's a big difference in the assumptions behind this scenario, and I present them both not to confuse that the numbers are so similar, but to stand out something that might be possible in looking differently at what we do with these scenarios. Both scenario number 1 and scenario number 2, which you see here, assume we can maintain a good portion of WIA's current enrollment moving forward. In scenario number 1, we worked under the assumption that about 33 to 45 students from WIA would move back into our brick and mortar schools. In scenario number 2, we assume that we could capture those students in some alternative version of online support that can be accomplished with less staff. This scenario assumes an attempt to provide current WIA K-8 students with an opportunity to continue some form of alternate online instruction by folding an opportunity into one of our other existing programs, which live within our budget for the program. This scenario does assume that the current enrollment at WIA would shift into one of those combo programs within an existing program, and that staffing levels would be adjusted to the enrollment. So I guess the point is, for a similar reduction over the 2-year period, we could provide with 2 staff members potentially some alternate opportunities. It would not necessarily look like what the current structure of WIA looks like now if we move to this scenario. Scenario 3, again, targets savings that will get us over the 8 million marker, but was created under the assumption that WIA continues in its current form. Doing that has an impact on staffing in our brick and mortar schools that will be evident in future slides. But I guess the important point now is to notice that all 3 of these scenarios include target savings that will get us over the 8 million marker. So in that sense, any of these scenarios are viable options for moving forward. Here you see actual changes in staffing numbers for the scenarios over the 2 years. And you can see that by the end of the 2 years, each of these scenarios gets us closer to the pre-COVID staffing levels I discussed earlier. Scenario 1 and 2 have similar impacts on staffing, but again, we're built on different assumptions about the future of WIA. So it's important that even though they look the same here, we're thinking about the different options that are present in the assumptions behind those scenarios. I think the point is that there's some potential that both scenario and 1 and 2, which result in similar savings and staff impacts, could be achieved, even though they're based on different assumptions for the way we look at the future of WIA. Please note that this slide also shows something that was one of our goals. This shows how we have sought to create scenarios that spread the impact of the reductions across employee groups. The larger percentage and reduction of admin staff is a response to survey results indicating a perception that we're top-heavy with administration. That's why all of these scenarios include a larger percentage and reduction of our admin. We have about 50 administrators in the district, 555 CERT staff, and 336 classified staff. And those are the numbers that play into the percentage of reductions over the 2-year period. So digging deeper into each of these scenarios, this slide shows the number of staffing positions that would not be backfilled along with the associated savings. Several assumptions are at work in this scenario. Again, the scenario assumes that we discontinue WIA and that the majority of our current WIA students would re-enter brick and mortar schools. That would be 33 to 45 students re-entering the system. It is possible that if we discontinue WIA, we will lose some of the students enrolled there, as families do have other online options, such as the Washington Virtual Academy and the Federal Way Online program. But I have assumed in this scenario that about 33 to 45 of those current students would re-enter our brick and mortar schools. If that does not turn out to be the case, the result would be this scenario would need to be adjusted to reduce potentially an additional 2 certificated positions over the period of the 2 years. I will say if we do end up moving in this direction, I think it's important to ensure we meet with families and provide them with information about alternate options for continuing online learning venues through things like the Washington Virtual Academy or Federal Ways Online program, but also some of our brick and mortar options that are specialized, such as Valley Academy. The potential impact on positions here ranges from really 75 to 77 or so positions, depending on how many students we might recapture into the brick and mortar system that are currently enrolled in WIA. In this scenario, again, there are several important assumptions. It does result in a similar savings and staffing impact to scenario one, but the assumptions are different. This scenario assumes an attempt to provide K-8 students with an opportunity to continue with some alternate version of online instruction by folding those learning opportunities into one of our other existing programs. That would allow us to reduce staffing to match enrollment and allow us to live within our budget for the program. Again, the scenario assumes that current enrollment at WIA would move into the district in such an alternate program, and that would allow us to adjust staffing levels to enrollment. Both of these scenarios, 1 and 2, would result in a reduction of about 3 to 4 staff members somewhere in our K-8 system. And in both scenarios, in order to do that, we will follow the guidelines in the WIA contract to determine placement opportunities if current WIA staff are moving back into the system. Both scenarios, again, require similar reductions in staff levels. And I think the big difference is that in scenario 2, we would be pursuing some alternatives that may provide options to keep some of our current WIA students in the district. Overall, positions would be impacted throughout the 2 years. Again, 75 to 77 positions, pending the number of students from WIA that might be willing to re-enter an alternative online situation. And our third and final scenario here also includes several assumptions. This scenario indicates greater impact to staffing numbers because of some of the assumptions involved. The scenario assumes we continue WIA in its current form and at current staffing levels. The model assumes that enrollment at WIA will slightly increase over the next 2 years. I used an increase of approximately 31 students over the next 2 years to build this scenario. That is about 16 students per year. As the 8th grade classes move out, that would be 13 students approximately per year if we had our current numbers continuing. So I've, in the 31, replaced the 8th graders that are moving out with 13 new kids coming in and an additional 3. So about 16 student increase per year is what plays into this scenario. Even with those increases, we would still be overstaffed by about 2 certificated staff members each year, and that would result in deficits to run the school if those numbers played out. The estimated deficits are shown in red here over the 2-year period, and that would result in the need to decrease an additional 4 or 5 staff from our brick and mortar schools during the 2-year period in order to get to the over 8 million savings target. It is possible that enrollment at WIA might actually continue to decrease as well, though that is not played out in this scenario. I've included a slight increase in enrollment there. This scenario, again, would involve gaining ground for the deficits by increasing the number of staff reduced, positions reduced from our brick and mortar schools. And so the impact on total positions would be about 3 to 5 higher than the other 2 scenarios. That was a lot of information, and I made it in the 35 to 40 minute range that I was shooting for. And I want to say this, I began today with a reminder that behind all these tables and numbers are people. And we know that makes these decisions hard. And my goal is to make sure the board has the best information I can provide based on our current understanding of budget parameters, which, as we've talked about, we still have many unknowns, including the legislative impacts and enrollment impacts. But we are attempting to get out in front of this even though we know some of the numbers may be tentative, in order to be as fair as possible to our staff and our families. The next step for the board will be to select a scenario for the district to pursue. And our hope is that the board has enough info to select one of these scenarios at our regularly scheduled February 28th board meeting, unless the board feels like they might be ready for a Valentine's Day decision tomorrow. But once a scenario is selected, we will then begin working on how to make that scenario play out in our system, which will likely result in the need for additional board input as we continue through this year. I'll be working with the union leads, our district leadership, and the board budget committee closely for the remainder of the year as we move a budget plan forward and do the best we can to meet some of these savings targets. The work that we do between now and the end of this year also impacts where we might be with some of these targets. And I will say, as I close here, that we are continuing to refine our expenses as we move throughout this year. We have several months left in the school year to try and reduce current expenditures, and we are trying to aggressively do that in order to help with some of the plans moving forward. As we open up for questions you may have, I want to remind the public who may be watching this in a video format later that we do have additional information available on our website that includes much detail about our budget and videos, et cetera. You can access those using the URL that you see on the screen here or by scanning the QR code. And we hope that people who are interested will go to the website and check out some of those materials. That was a lot of information, board, and I would love to entertain questions that you may have. For which I will say I don't know if I don't know the answer.
Can you put it back on the enrollment slide?
Liz, if you can bring those back up. This one? Oh, yep, you bet. Let's go back. There we go. Are there specific questions, Director Norton, about that information?
I was just trying to get a picture for who we serve now and wrap my mind around approximately how many in each grade level and whether a 16-person replacement estimate is reasonable under the circumstances for as it relates to scenario 3. Just kind of working through in my own mind.
Oops. You had earlier said that well, and I can't remember if it was in this meeting or another meeting, that the current enrollment is 57. So that represents an increase of 8 or 9 students in the last month. Do we know how that came about?
I would guess that it's due to the semester ending at the middle school levels and, you know, in the elementary. I think most of the increase was seen at the middle school level. And we do, as a district, see a need in particular for opportunities at the middle school level outside of our brick and mortar system, which is one of the reasons scenario 2 is also part of this discussion.
So the legislative session ends in late April. And our budget timeline to make these decisions is when?
The official budget will be adopted in August, but in order to move things forward in a way that lets our staff that will be impacted know, we want to start pursuing what we can do with reductions earlier than that. That would provide our staff with the best opportunity to seek employment elsewhere if they will be impacted by these reductions. And give us a larger amount of time to see how some of these things play out in the system. When we look at, for example, the positions indicated in the scenarios, those are positions, not necessarily number of staff that will be impacted. An example would be Some of the scenarios include 11 certificated positions at the elementary level. Depending on retirements and resignations and how other things play out with contractual guidelines for seniority, that 11 positions could have implications for more than 11 staff members.
So this is not an unusual timing situation. We also have a contractual obligation to notify staff if we won't be continuing their contracts. We're having by May 15th, is it May 10th or 15th, something like that?
Kelly, is that correct? It's May 15th. Yes.
So I'd like to depend on the legislature coming to some positive decisions in our favor, but in reality, the timeline, between when the legislature closes and, when we have to give those notices is really super small. And we know that the budget impacts from the state are really super slow in coming too. They don't close session and then all of a sudden we know that equates to X amount of dollars for us. There's a lot of analysis going. So I wish, the time frame that we're under was a better situation, so that if we did reap gains from the state, we could make some quick changes and turn around. I also just wanted to say that in the last few days, we have received, I have received in my inbox, I don't know what everybody else has received, 6 emails, I think, from families that, represent somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 or 12 children. I didn't really count those up, but what I heard in the stories that were brought forward is the struggles that these families have had. And it's taken some of them years to find a good place for their students to feel confident about going to school, to feel successful. And it does have a huge impact on their mental health, as well as their ability to succeed in the future. So to me, as we move forward, this is a numbers game. This is about the numbers and saving money. And you stated it well earlier, that it is about the human side, the staff and the students. And it's a huge deal to me. It's a big decision to make. It may be only a handful of students, but to me, the value of each one of those students that don't fit somewhere else is really important.
It would take me several minutes to go over how I view the scenario we face, and I'm not going to do that right now. You can relax. But at some point, I think I do want to do that because I think it needs to set the scene. But specifically relating to the timing question and making a committed decision on one of the scenarios promptly, I want to test whether what I'm saying is accurate or not. We will be waiting for Olympia decisions. We will have a time gap. There was a May 15th notification deadline. The budget does not get finalized until August. And then we have a 2-year plan. So let's say we have, I'm just going to use positions, 40 positions. We say this is our target. My assumption is that if we over or undershoot, there is the ability to make minor adjustments. If we are a little more successful in saving costs this year, we can maybe, and there's time to retain people, keep a couple extra people in year 1. If you go the other way around, year 2 can be either more or less painful. Even after, let's say there's a board decision of targeting one thing on February the 28th, all the time we've got a limited amount to maneuver, but it's there. But what is absolutely critical is if we don't commit to something close to the central position, then we face, instead of a 50-50 adjust to 45, 55, or be lucky and go down to 45. We face an 80 to 100 kind of catastrophe by delaying and pushing everything into potentially one pile. Is that right? I guess what I'm saying is we have to make a commitment, but that is not a single number. It is a range that we can manage and maneuver in at every point to advantage.
Yes,
So it is a benefit to make that commitment early that increases your maneuverability and the safety of that whole 2-year journey being managed.
I believe so. And what plays into, I think, the scenarios is important in what you're asking. When we built these scenarios, I used, for example, median salary targets for each of the different employee groups. And as this plays out into the system, depending on the particular employees, where we can absorb positions or not backfill them or use current staff, we have current salaries that are above those median levels and below those median levels. And that means one of the most important aspects of what you saw today are actually the number targets that we're trying to get to, because I have used median salaries to indicate approximately in the scenarios how many staffing positions will be impacted, but it could be more or less positions depending on the actual salaries of the way the individuals in the system that are impacted.
I think
And
that's a good example of the variability and outcome. And it just struck me one that you've been talking about positions. I'm assuming there is a difference between the number of positions today in the district and the number of filled positions.
we do have some positions that are currently posted but not filled.
Yeah.
And we are evaluating those in terms of this year's budget to determine, are these positions that we will actually fill moving forward? And some of them we know that we do need to fill, and others we're, again, evaluating the feasibility of not backfilling as part of this process, which could lead to budget savings this year that will help us moving forward.
Yeah, and what I was going to say is the actual services, let's say we've got unfilled positions, then the services we're offering to the students are slightly hurt by those unfilled positions as of today, real world, as opposed to budget world. Then maybe you fill the positions or maybe you don't for budget savings. And also when you talk about the human element, let's say there are 2 positions that don't get filled. That's 2 people that are not impacted. If you talk about your position reduction, 2 actual blood and flesh human beings that you don't have to reduce.
Correct. And knowing that we will have additional reductions in year 2, that is an important factor.
Do you know any more? Can you say any more about what the reduced combined WIA with existing program would look like, or in scenario 2?
We are in discussion and discovery phase about that. I can say that it would be an attempt to match a program to the enrollment levels. So it would be less staff involved, and we're trying to work out the details of how could we potentially do something with a number of staff that match the enrollment in the schools. And we have not completely ironed that out, but if the board chooses that scenario, we'll pursue it, and I will come back to the table with some options.
I think it would be important that the families that are most impacted by it might be involved in some way in determining what would work best for them, to help them formulate, what it looks like going forward, if that scenario was chosen.
we'll have to look at what we think is capacity wise, a responsible approach based on the number of staff that we could allocate, which I am guessing would be about 2 to 3 staff members, and how that would play out into our existing programs. We can seek some feedback from parents on that. We will also likely seek some feedback from the staff at the current Wenatchee Internet Academy as well. We'll see what kind of options that we can come up with. Again, it will become more difficult to provide programming that aligns the staffing with the enrollment because of the spread of the K-8 spectrum that is currently offered. It becomes difficult to manage a spread that large with a single teacher, especially at the middle school level, or even 2 teachers. But we will explore options if the board chooses that scenario, which is number 2.
I'd like to continue that vein and agreeing with Laura, something that I think is really, really critical. And in my words, this is a little further down from what Laura said of consulting with the students and families. I think every person or every family in WIA needs to have what I'd call an individualized outplacement, because there are a range. I would expect some people have unique needs that would need to be fitted. Others, maybe the natural choice or preferred choice would be, it's not such a big deal to go into a regular school. So I think there's going to be a range of difficulties of making that placement. But I think what's absolutely critical is that we do the human element, that we, the school district, put in some kind of dedicated resources of somebody who's highly competent to help those families move, if option 2 or option 1 is chosen, move their children into the next phase in the best possible way. And one reason I say that is that's going to take resources, money, and time in year 1. But the savings is going to come in year 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 from a better placement of the students, both for the families and the benefit of the students, and for the district in the sense that that you've created good homes for those students. I think is really, really critical. We need to look at it in that dynamic context. Now, I realize that you're talking about concepts in scenario 2, and I'm not going to ask today, but I think as soon as we know what's feasible and the array of them, that would be highly desirable if we can achieve it. But going back to, I'm going to spend a lot of time thinking about the general principles, but the principle is that we need to do the best possible job in the short term so that we don't have long-term pain, which goes both ways. It goes to the budget and it goes into the families. So I think that's kind of a wish that I would have, and I hope it is feasible. And but above all, I think it needs some particular attention to the individual needs to both place people in the best possible way, whichever choice is taken. And if we were to continue running WIA the way it is, you've got to remember that you're running a deficit forevermore, which is another factor.
I was just going to say that, excuse me, I agree with what Martin is saying, and I think that goes to the importance of figuring out what we're going to do sooner rather than later with this program, because I do think it will be if it's not going on in this same capacity, a good outreach needs to happen to make sure that students are located where they will best fit their needs. And it sounds like it's been a good eye-opening opportunity for some of these families to understand more about their students and where the issues are, that maybe we can then in turn help figure out what programs are the best if we're not able to sustain that. My initial reaction is I'm not super comfortable running a program at a deficit and relying on significant assumptions of increases unless we have a targeted outreach planned. I'm worried about the impacts. We're talking about 5 basic education staff being removed from positions in other buildings, what that does to more students. So there's no winner any way you look at it. So it's just, what is the most responsible for everybody involved, and how do we help all the families we can?
I think Martin said it pretty well. One of the things that we went through during COVID was that one-on-one attempt for teachers to connect with the parents and the student in regards to what were the challenges, what's going to work best for your family during, the shutdown. And so we saw it worked during that time. The way it was handled, that intentionality of learning more about the needs of the student, I think is going to play a key role if we go with scenario two, just because I agree, there's students that don't fit the traditional, 6-7 hour day school day. And we have the responsibility to, meet those needs of the students, and just finding that, that individual, that connection in the plan that's going to work for the students so we can retain them in our system and meet their academic needs. It's very much needed.
Do we know how many of the students at WIA have IEPs? And maybe you don't have an answer for that right now.
10,
Okay, and
I believe. Let me check on that real quick. Yes, 10 is correct, but I do not know, an IEP is a large range, and I don't know what the specific needs are of the 10 students.
whatever direction we go, I think it's important for us to keep in mind what the special ed, requirements are, the legal requirements for us, and to make sure that we are, meeting the intent of those requirements. And also to evaluate, in our evaluation of the cost, what happens to those students if they do go back into the building? Is there any increased costs? I heard from some families that their student would qualify for a full-time para, for example, which they aren't utilizing at the moment because it's not necessary under the WIA model. So that would lessen some of the financial savings that would be gained by eliminating the program. Just want to factor that kind of thing into our equation as we're making decisions.
Thank you. Are there other questions that I could try and answer for the board?
As we're looking at maybe option 2, since WIA is only currently serving K-8, Maria brings up a good point that part of a benefit of a program like that could be students who aren't able to sit in class during classical school hours. I see that mostly being applicable at the high school level. And I don't know if that in our hybrid look is something that to increase program services there to make it more valuable. If maybe it's too late, but if there is an ability to add a 9 through 12 component to it, and then you build in the opportunity maybe for night school type opportunities. I just thinking of ways to try and make it work.
I do know that Wenatchee High School currently has a version of an online program that uses a service called Apex. And students who are involved in that program are learning through an online resource. And I believe the school has an individual who oversees that. We have a district staff member who oversees that. They work directly with the students. Although they are not the instructor of the course, the instruction is provided through the Apex. That is this similar offering is available at Westside High School. But that is something that we could explore. It's not part of what you see here in these scenarios, something outside of the current structure.
I'd like to take a step back a little bit because I think it will be helpful. And because it addresses the fact that this provides opportunities as well as pain. And kudos to Wenatchee School District for within a few months setting up an online academy during COVID. And when we looked at that, you saw the potential for maybe there's a demand for this kind of education that would be at a scale where we could provide it economically. And, I know that we budgeted 100 students this year. I would think more likely an economic scale would be more like 200. And it could well have happened that would be a change, in which case the Wenatchee School District would have played a leading role of demonstrating that this kind of diverse education is very, very valuable. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case right now. But I think rightly, I'm picking up on Laura's point that there will be special needs in the 50 students in there. We also look at ways that people can learn, and the questions that you asked about, can we extend this style more than we're already doing at Westside and Wenatchee High School? All of that fits into the pattern of taking a targeted decision now, putting the evidence so that we do it well, and then maybe we can create. I am concerned that it's not going to be easy to create the hybrid concepts that you're talking about, but I think that's great. But then from an economic, so I just wanted to say that opportunities are part of it. Remember how we got here and that there are opportunities in the further. Then I want to put the pain in perspective in a way. If we look at the number of employees that are impacted from this, you can think of it as having several drivers. The first one is temporary ESSA funds. They
Sorry, can we remove the screen sharing so the public can see
Okay,
us?
sorry. I do think this is helpful for the board and the community and everybody else to see this in context. So we were looking at a significant reduction in staffing. Some of that comes from the termination of ESSA funds, which funded people. I don't know the exact percentages, but if you look at the enrollment, let's say it's decreasing at about 1.5% per year. If you keep the same ratios, then your staff will need to decrease at 1.5% per year. The staffing decreases that we're looking at over the 2-year period are at about 4% per year. So think of that decrease as occurring in kind of 3 ways. 1, temporary ESSA. 2, natural decline in enrollment. And the third one is what I would call the quality of service change, where we've got the same number of students. We're going to have to reduce the total number of staff. And that is not as big as the whole numbers. So the 40 comes in 3 places, and some of it is necessary and not that much. And then if you throw in vacancies and attrition, it's manageable. So I think we have to look at the problem in this context, that it's driven by external variables, not just internal variables. To a limited extent, it's a reduction in service from today to 2 years from now. If we can create good opportunities, we can mitigate that. This is a problem that can have reasonable outcomes. And I just wanted to say that to put things in context.
For clarifying purposes, we're talking about positions, not bodies, correct?
Correct. The positions are what is shown there. And in some sense, positions are related to bodies, but some of the things I shared earlier have implications for how the number of positions we wouldn't be backfilling impact potentially more than one individual.
Just something of note, we do have a very specialized situation at the Valley Academy that could possibly or potentially absorb some of these kids or in some way use, it's such a very specialized group and teachers and students there that could possibly be combined with this in a way that makes it salvageable. Just think that's, and it's something kind of in speaking with, the principal there, he has expressed a desire for the community to better understand what Valley Academy offers and that they can fill that role for some students that need something very specific. So that's worth looking into, I think.
Thank you. I do think that is important to note. And for folks who may be watching this on home, Valley Academy is a co-op program that we have in the district. There are currently about 162 FTE that are served at Valley Academy. And it is a great program. Any other questions that I can try and field the board?
No questions, just thanks for all the hard work of you and your staff and putting all these together. I know it's not easy and I do appreciate the efforts of everyone who contributed.
So does the board feel like we need time to digest this information further? Bill's looking for a little bit of guidance, right? A little bit of a direction, whether, I guess, do you want to give us our options? I know the goal is to have
Right.
a directive.
So we are looking to get on searching out how one of these scenarios will play out in the system as soon as possible. We have targeted February 28th board meeting for some direction on which scenario you would like us to go after. But certainly we would entertain, if the board is ready for a Valentine's Day decision tomorrow, we can put it on the agenda for tomorrow. But I want to make sure the board has ample time to consider factors that they would like to consider and additional questions that may come up.
Have we, or do we have the opportunity to maybe survey some of these families just to get their initial thoughts of where their students might go if a program wasn't, if we offered either a hybrid program or the program wasn't available at all? Do we get any sense? And then I would like more information about the alternative costs that might be associated with bringing some of these students with more specialized needs into the basic ed programs.
Yeah, I have not done a survey of families. This is the first time that this information has been public, although I did have a meeting with the WIA staff last week just to let them know that they would play into some of the scenarios and share some of the information that we had seen that would be shared today. So we could reach out to families. We have some work to do to determine what the alternative options might look like and the costs associated with those for scenario 2. I have some work to do to find out for students that are qualified for special education at the Internet Academy, what would their needs look like in the brick and mortar system. And in that, I may be able to have some of that information ready by the 28th. I'm not sure if I would have it all.
I would like us to have at least until the 28th. I would not feel ready without more information from the families impacted to make a decision tomorrow. That seems way too fast for me.
Do we feel confident that the options we would be presenting to parents, do we have a list of options? Because I do agree with Julie. I think it would be valuable to survey the parents and see what they would be considering. But I think the district needs to be prepared to present those different options.
We know some of the options that would be available that wouldn't necessarily be options from us. Washington Virtual Academy and the Federal Way Academy are viable options that continue online programming. We would need some time to figure out what our alternative options might look like and what the costs associated with those would be before I could go out and say to families, here's our option, as compared to some of the other options. Of course, we know, our brick and mortar option would be people return into our current brick and mortar options. It's that in between option between brick and mortar, an outside virtual option, and what we could offer that we need some time to hash out and figure out what the costs are associated with that before I could go to families with a survey.
And maybe that's part of it, is we just have to be really brutally honest with ourselves, and that maybe we can't meet an internet need. And so if, for the sake of getting information from families, it's, if this program is not available, are you comfortable with a physical only option, or would an internet option be your only avenue? And then what does that look like? That gives us at least some ability, some information to make decisions with, because then we know if we're putting effort behind option 2 or 3 to salvage our program, or whether it's we need to help them find what would meet that need. We know they're not coming back physically to our space, regardless of what happens. So it could be a decision point or information to help make a decision without being so specific of what it actually looks like from us, in terms of just, is a physical space even an option for your family?
I think if my colleagues would like more certainty, I will also agree with waiting. The question I'm asking myself is, I think you could express a preference right now. The questions are we going to what extent are we going to find suitable alternatives? But if you looked at preferences on the assumption that you could make an option work reasonably well, I think a prompt decision could be taken, and then you could move earlier into solving the problems. And, I would be very comfortable with that, because I think if we found something, but we're in February, we would have time to tackle insurmountable problems and work on them. They wouldn't, I'll say insurmountable, but something that's more severe than we thought about, and work on it. But because I do think it's going to be individualized solutions, but individualized solutions doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's going to be perfect. And I think if I look at this, the one thing that I think is very difficult is running a 50-student school forevermore. So I feel that we have to find alternatives. And I'm anxious to be looking at that as early as possible. So, I would be very comfortable saying that one option is my preference. That does not mean that we can't change our course within the next 2, 4, 6 weeks if we find something that we can't do that. You're working that the rest of the problem, 95% of it, is the same, and you're starting on it earlier.
Correct. We, in choosing a scenario, we would then pursue that and try and make it happen. And we're going to learn some things probably along the way. And as we move through any of these scenarios, some of those other factors are also going to come into play, like legislative impacts. So in pursuing a particular scenario, we're going after a course. How that race finishes is still dependent on a lot of things.
And I keep forgetting there's another constituency that we haven't paid tribute to, and that is the staff and their creative programs at WIA. One of the reasons that there is a demand is the excellent and different opportunities that have been created there, and our desire to retain some of those characteristics or all of those characteristics in the school district in one place or another. I just wanted to pay tribute to that constituency as well. We talk about students, parents, and staff in general. But then there's those very different programs that come out of WIA that we've learned something about.
So it sounds like we're likely going to be targeting decision for the 28th meeting, and that I will try and come to the 28th with any additional information I can that will help inform your decisions. And on the 28th, when we do try and narrow down a scenario, again, that's a starting point for us as a team moving forward to try and make those things happen.
Any further questions or discussion?
I just want to say thank you. Having been a member of the Budget Committee, I know how diligent the work has been done. Well, I don't say no. I have a fair impression of how much work and heart and soul has been put into it. And I do think from the district's efforts, and I hope it's been reinforced by what the board said, we are going to be very human as we go forward, looking for the best possible solutions that we can find. And I think that's an important message to send.
Absolutely. Thank you, Martin. One of the things I think is important also to consider between scenario 1 and 2 versus 3, we're already dealing with positions, right? 75 positions, and the idea of running a program that's running on a deficit and can't continue running on a deficit if we don't get the enrollment numbers, we're also losing additional staffing with scenario 3. Okay, there's no further questions or discussion. I think we're adjourning.